Haru, welcome to Curated Questions.
Thank you for having me here, Ken.
Absolutely. I was very excited when I heard your conversation with Lynn on Choose to Be Curious, and then a LinkedIn post that I saw referencing Jeff Wetzler as well, a previous alumni. I was like, oh, this is someone I got to chat with. So
Okay.
looking forward to the conversation.
Me too.
I always like to start at the same point, and that is to ask folks, when did you first understand the power of questions?
I think I understood it very young, and I'll tell you why. I probably didn't know it was a power then, but I was 4 when I first went to the United States. And my idea of questions is very closely related to language. And I came to the United States without knowing a word of English. So I had to learn English really quickly. And then that asking questions really meant, well, I could get things, including, I always say, my friend Fiona's crayons. And what else did I want? I wanted to join in on hopscotch. And I had to ask questions in order to get all those things. So at a really early age, I think I had internalized the idea that questions are really important.
In that idea of using them to help learn language. So once again, what age or
I was
about
4.
what age were you?
Yeah, so
4.
I had
Okay,
kind of,
yeah.
I guess, some command of Japanese, but no command of English at all. So in my mind, speaking and questioning were all kind of tied together. And that was really the beginning of my interest in language and in culture and finding out the world. So it was the beginning of my research, I think. I always think of questioning as kind of research. And so
Yeah.
very basic research, but research for survival as it was, because a 4-year-old needs to know a lot of things in order to be able to survive in the playground. So that was me questioning there. Mm-hmm.
I also just think about that time frame where as yes, you are seeking to learn a new language, but at 4 years old or at that age, you're also still learning about the world so much, of the basics. And so having been kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool to also learn a second language that everybody else around you is speaking,
Yeah, sure.
that I could see how questions would definitely crop up as a helpful tool to understand the world around you. And where was it that you had moved to?
I moved from Tokyo to New York City. So it was
Okay.
not easy. It was a brutal awakening.
Wow. Yeah, that deep end of the pool for sure.
Yes, a swim kind of thing. And I did. And I think questioning was really the lifeline back to gaining a reality that I could make sense of the world around me. Absolutely right. I had to learn everything all at once. But I think children are predisposed to learning everything all at once. So they don't really know that there's any serial or linear way of learning things. They get smacked with everything. So in that regard, I don't think I was that different from any other child. And that's what we know and what we're used to is we have to learn everything around us to keep up with the adults. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So then what was your journey into that linguistic world that you have spent your career in? What did that trajectory look like?
I am what they call a third culture kid, which is different from, say, an immigrant, which means I moved around quite a lot during my formative years, changing languages, cultures, school systems. Totally not recommended, but I did that. I think I did it sort of 8 critical times. So I moved back to Japan when I was 7, and I did primary school in Japan. And then I had to go back to a different system and then learn on all the language and culture that I had missed out on in the 3 years I was in New York while I was learning English and American culture. And so those 2 points were really what already instilled in me this ferocity I had for learning language and culture, because it was really necessary for my survival. And then I moved around some more. I went to Southeast Asia and again to the US, and I ended up at university, I think in your neck of the woods in Washington, D.C. That's where I sort of felt I first settled. I was able to
Hmm.
land. And that was when I was first introduced to linguistics. And then I went on to do a master's and a doctorate after that. So it became a kind of formal kind of appreciation of language and culture then.
I appreciate that distinction of third culture kid. Had a conversation with Austin Graff early on in the podcast, and he had a similar type of a story. His parents were missionaries. He was an American kid, grew up in former Soviet Union, and he said that he just never really felt like he had a home
Hmm.
because it's just you don't quite fit anywhere because you may not have the, as you mentioned, when you went back to Japan, it was 3 years of not understanding the latest songs or and
Sure.
projecting a little bit, but it's the latest songs or the latest TV shows because you've been doing that over here, but all the other kids know have been tracking all of those
That's
things.
right.
And it's like, just this not quite fitting, close, but not quite. And so needing to come through that and still find a way to thrive, that I would say is a challenge, but for those that do it, I would submit it probably becomes a little bit of a superpower.
Well, I think it's at once kind of a superpower and once very ordinary because I think if you're living it, that's really all you know.
Yeah.
I just thought that's the way things were. And I didn't know that other people could look at the world very immaculately through the prism of one language and one culture. I didn't know that because that wasn't my experience. So in a way, it was ordinary to me, and I had to get to grips with it. But somewhere in me, I must have known that it's important for me. And that's why I went and studied it formally, I think, just to kind of make sense of it.
Do you think that your background gave you a little bit of a leg up in the world, in the field that you went into for in comparison to those folks that didn't have that same kind of third culture kid growing up experience? Or was it most people that were in that field did have some kind of experience like that?
I would say both things. Not everybody did. And I
Mhm.
think maybe the advantages I felt, or now looking back at the advantages I feel I have now, is more that not just the idea that I know there are a lot of different perspectives, starting from there is a
Hmm.
very different starting point, I think, but also the idea that in some ways, even as you progress in the culture that you have just been bounced to, you're always a little bit lost because, like you said, you're always a little bit behind the other people who have been there and know everything and know all the categories that work. So I am familiar with that idea of kind of being lost and being uncertain. So I think the advantage I have is I don't have to be certain all the time. I can just
Hmm.
be like, and maybe this fits into your idea of questioning too, because I can always remain in that questioning mode. In some senses, it is perhaps exhausting to always be in that mode of kind of querying all the time. But again, that's what I'm used to. I've always been in research mode, and I kind of am happy to be sitting there not being 100% sure of the way things work and always being in learning mode, I think. I
Hmm.
think that's probably what I would say is really the big strength. And then that probably circles around and connects to adaptability because you feel like, well, if I could get a little bit closer, I would learn this. So it links to other good things like adaptability and understanding perspectival differences and things like that. But I think that not being 100% sure all the time is kind of a weird strength.
As you were describing that, what was kind of resonating in me is that for the first half of my life, I was
That's
very
good.
certain in my ideals, worldview, and the rest.
Mm,
I knew I was right. I'd play the humble card, and wouldn't come off quite too arrogant, but deep down, I knew that I was right. Then through a series of events and lovely conversations, reading, growing, and all, I've become far less certain.
Hmm.
And I think that's provide an opening to the world to listen in ways that I might not have before, because before I was so certain. And the world has gotten to be a much better place for me as a result of being less certain. And a lot of it comes down to this is the only way it could be done. This is the right religion. This is the right political belief, those kind of pillar identities, if you will. And so a little bit of that uncertainty, I think, and especially for yourself, and having spent extended periods of time in different places throughout the world, is going to give you exposure to a range of ideas. It's not just popping in for 2 weeks or doing a weekend, but really kind of being able to soak in and then seeing and testing what's working, what's not so much. And then there's the whole arc of history. Yeah, I could see how it is a bit of a superpower once you recognize what it is.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part. But like you, I can say these things now because I'm looking back on it. It's always easier to say with hindsight, I think. Yes. Yeah. I don't want to speak on your behalf, but for many people who grow up in monolingual or monocultural worlds, I mean, it's a kind of sanity to be certain, you know, I mean, that's your world. So it's a kind of reality you create and you recreate that every day. So, you know, thinking that, no, that's not the way it is, would just make you a little bit crazy, I think. So I'm probably somewhere I'm a little bit crazy, but I think it's a kind of, how do you say, like a tolerance, or you build an ability, your threshold for dealing with that uncertainty is probably strengthened in your lifetime. So I think the older we get better at doing that than if you stay kind of thinking this is the way. So there's a time for it, I think. In the arc of life, you need a time when you need to be certain about things. And then after a certain point, you can sit back and say, okay, you know, there's that, but there's also other things. It's a kind of strange wealth, I think, to be able to say, okay, you have that, but you can also have these things. It's not all just kind of black and white. Yeah.
To borrow from the book Anti-Fragile, and just thinking about how does the certainty in my beliefs make me fragile, then I think that kind of gets to that point of you have been able to, because of your experience, I would say that you're far more anti-fragile because you've operated, because you've been able to be in these different environments and cultures, systems, that if you were dropped into some place, right, do a survivor kind of thing, then your ability to function and thrive, your timeline on that, I think, would be much shorter as a result of what you've gone through.
I never thought about it that way. That's interesting. I'm not really sure about that. Also, if I could challenge that a little bit.
Please, yes.
I think fragility in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. Of course, we all want to survive rather than die, but that's also a lens in a way. What's fragile in one place might not be fragile in another. So sometimes being soft, or even as one culture sees something as weak, is actually something that helps you survive. So fragility is also multifaceted, as is, I think, the aesthetics of it. So the beauty of it is as well. So that I think I approach everything with the kind of the idea that it can be many things. And where that I kind of thinking I think it's dangerous is then maybe it leads to chaos, anything goes kind of thing. But in my studies with listening, one of the things that I've been into recently is listening to music. And some of the thinking in listening to music is that you need to listen to familiar music because that's very comforting and it gives you all the wonderful feel-good music vibes that you're looking for. But at the same time, you need novel things as well, which is what allows you to grow and expand your ideas. And everybody has this somewhere in there kind of sweet spot. So I think even in that fragility, there's the strength, and the fragility probably works like that
Hmm.
too. And it's not one thing or the other, but I do appreciate looking at it as a kind of a super strength. I never really thought of it that way, though.
Well, and I also appreciate the challenge because that right there, I think it's just a perfect example of the language that we're using, how I've assigned it by virtue of my question almost. I've said that being anti-fragile is more important than fragile, just by virtue of my question.
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate and love how you were like, well, is that kind of almost saying, is that always true?
Hmm.
I love a question coming back. That's a glorious thing.
I think
Nice.
it's important in amongst English speakers, primarily, like I've written in the book as well, that because English is so diverse, and so it is really important to be clear. So that's why I think English speakers in English speaking countries, but also people who are learning English or have it drilled into them, then one of the most important things about learning the English language is to be clear, to be precise and clear. And that also aids computer language and things like that as well, because that gives a kind of one-to-one correspondence with words and meaning. And so in a language like English, it's where you have lots of different people using it. That comes to be a very important thing. In a language like Japanese, where you only have kind of an island of people, a lot of them, but an island of people speaking
Hmm.
the same language, it's really less important to have that kind of clarity of you can say a lot of things and kind of be like, oh, I'm talking about the salt acid, kind of thing. And you don't have to be so clear. So I guess it's a kind of necessity for English speakers to be clear as well.
Now, I know that in the English language, we have like lots of synonyms, and we'll use that one for example. Is that the same way in Japanese?
We have a lot of synonyms, and I was thinking about questions, and one of the really interesting thing about the word question in Japanese is, so my first point of reference is we have characters that are kind of like a little pictogram from our ancestors. It's kind of has a little etymology all in there. So you can kind of go back in 2000 years and think, oh, this is what they were thinking about just by looking at a character. That to me is a superpower. It's an amazing thing that you can do that you can't do with kind of alphabetical languages. But so listening, I started off the book by saying listening has two different kinds of characters for listening. One is listening that's written with a gate and an ear in the middle. So it's kind of listening for information from the outside is what I call it. And the other one is the one you mentioned, which is the listening in the 14 hearts. So that's kind of like listening to people and listening to not just what they're saying, but also what else they're showing about in the conversation where they're talking. But questions also have multiple characters. One of the characters for question is the same character for to listen.
Okay.
So listening is in a sense questioning, and questioning is in a sense listening in one character. And then there's another character. So instead of the ear in the middle, there's another character that has a mouth in the middle. And that is also a question, but it's a different kind of question. It's much more of like an inquiry or a questioning you would do in, say, a courtroom, that kind of questioning. And then the third one is a more modern use of it, which is to ask a question like you might in an exam situation. So questioning in a formal setting. So these three different kinds of questionings that have been categorized in Japanese as different kinds of questioning. So you can get that just by reading the character, which I think is amazingly interesting.
So this is just a description of kind of three different kinds of questions.
Yeah, that's
three
what the
categories of
characters
questions.
describe. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I think the one thing about listening that's different for English language speakers and Japanese language speakers is that in both cases, I think questions act as a kind of navigating compass. You're in the dark about something, so you ask a question. We've been doing this, I've been asking questions to ourselves first, I guess, from when we're in utero. You hear all these outside sounds, you have no idea what they are, and you're asking yourself questions. So to me, those are the first kinds of questions. I think humans have that everywhere. So you're asking these different kinds of questions, and then I think in many cultures, questions are like a research. So you're seeking, it's a light in the darkness that of things you don't know about. But I think it's a different kind of light. I've always thought about this, and really, this is the first time I'm saying this. I've never written about it, but I always thought that questions for English speakers. Maybe I thought this as a child in New York or something, and it's just coming to me now. But questions for English speakers are more like a flashlight, and you spotlight something. You know that's the point of interest, so you spotlight it, and that's how you seek the answer for it. Whereas I think in Japanese questioning is more like, and I'm sorry, it may sound a little bit kind of old fashioned to say this, but you have a lantern and you're kind of lighting the way. And so you find the path kind of thing. So you're looking more at the context and you're seeing what it has to give you and things that turn up along the way rather than having an idea about something and spotlighting it. It's a very kind of, to me, it's a very different process of going for the content in one. I think from all the studies I've done and people I've talked to, when they first think of listening or asking a question, they first think of content, like the things somebody says, you ask a question about it.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in Japanese, it's much more important not to kind of extract information, but to get an idea of what the situation is about. And then, and only then can you ask the questions. Because you go from the outside in more than the inside out, I think. So that's my, my flashlight analogy.
Yeah, I'm loving this. So there's some of these fancy flashlights, these big mag flashlights that you can adjust.
Yes.
So it's almost like you can start off wide.
Yeah.
And then you can turn it now to become focused.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting view to take on things, is to say, okay, as a Westerner, as I approach something, let me first come with a wide view, the lantern view, and then perhaps once I understand some of this context, now I can dial in, because there's a risk that I may miss some of these other things just by virtue of me coming in only so focused. I'm going to have to think about how to, what examples that might look like. And then,
well, I take it from other studies
please.
that point out the difference between cultures that focus on content and cultures that focus on context. Need a lot of context, and the very stereotypical ones. And these are very stereotypical because obviously there are individual variances within each culture, but English probably for some of the reasons we were talking about earlier, because there are a lot of different people, focus on content, and Japanese always have to know about the people, the situation, and have a kind of long lead-in process before they can actually get to the content. So in business cultures, this has always been a problem between the US and Japan. Invariably, the American business person, if they have never gone to Japan, they go and expect everything to be sorted out in a meeting, and they come out thinking, did we even talk about anything? It just seems so vague and didn't get to the point, and we had this whole clean agenda and none of it was covered. What was that about? Why do we even need the meeting? And in the meanwhile, Japanese, if they go to a meeting in the US, often felt bulldozed by these things, and we're not ready to make any decisions in the meeting, because that wasn't really what their intentions were. For the meetings weren't for making decisions, and they had this long process of getting to know the people and the affiliates of the companies and all these kind of extended things. And there's a process called root binding, and you have to do all this outside work, going drinking with the guys and doing all kinds of background research before you even get to the table to discuss anything. So in a way, by the time you get to the meeting, in many Japanese internal meetings, all the decisions are already made because you've done all that outside work. I found recently that's often a problem in just even interpersonal conversations, sometimes very ordinary gendered conversations where you think you're talking about the same thing, but you're not talking about the same thing because somebody is focused on the content and somebody else is talking about way a lot of other things, but the main thing that you think you might be the focus of the conversation. I think many conversations are really about the lantern and the spotlight. Yeah.
And
The kind of
certainly,
misunderstandings that could happen.
yeah. And certainly, if I'm there with a flashlight with the narrow beam and somebody else is there with a lantern, the conversation's not going to go well. I mean,
You're not looking at the same
I'm
thing. We're not talking
right.
about the same thing. Yeah.
If I'm coming in with my flashlight, what are clues or language that might be being used that context is what the other person is talking about?
The easiest part of the context is I think there's a lot of situation and the place you're in, but mostly it's about the person. So if there is a misunderstanding, that's quite easy because on both ends, because we're very good at identifying people who don't look like they're listening to us. I think we're good at that. And then also people who start getting annoyed because they're not getting what they hope for in the conversation. I think we can identify that too. So when that happens, that's probably a good indicator that, oh, we're talking at cross purposes. We're not really talking about the same thing. So that's kind of the moment to step back maybe and go back to that kind of questioning mode and researcher mode and say, oh, okay, what's happening here? Because I think often what happens is when you notice it, then you think, oh no, okay, this conversation is going awry and you want to fix it, of course. And by fixing it, you just keep on applying more of more flashlight and kind of get a better picture of it. And then the other person is saying, no, we want a broader, bigger picture. And so it ends up making the conversation worse, actually, in a way. I think when we see that, but even noticing that that is happening, it helps the conversation to say, oh, okay. And sometimes I've had this happen to me often when I see it happening. I think, oh, I'm sorry. And it becomes kind of humorous because we know that has happened, which takes the sting off of misunderstandings, I think. So not that all misunderstandings are funny, but that is one kind of positive outcome of something that was going awry. It can end up better. And the other way is just to try to align and say, oh, okay, now I get what you were talking about. You had the flashlight on and then you look at the contents, or you say, oh, okay, you had your lantern out and sorry, I didn't think about asking you about something before, or you go pan out and look at the big picture again. And I think that probably is appreciated on either end if you can do the work that you need to do that, because it is effortful to try and see things from the other person's point of view, whether they're flashlighting or lanterning. Yeah.
And even apart from the cultural aspect of things, of whatever culture you come from, we're still individuals. If I'm Japanese and the culture is generally one where you come with a lantern first, and if how I'm wired doesn't mean that it's wrong, right? If I'm just more wired to dive into the details, then okay, as someone from Japan, I understand the culture. And so it's going to now, should be easier for me because I've had to do that deep learning. Because the culture says this is how we function. But if I'm a Westerner, and if we're using our flashlight most of the time, and my default is the details and the flashlight, I may be completely oblivious about the lantern. And so the fact that I even recognize that the lantern way exists is one massive step that needs to happen. But then that self-awareness that says, oh, I happen to be using a flashlight right now because this is how I'm defaulted to. And that's not what this circumstance requires. That's, that's kind of like two steps that you've got to take if you're naturally inclined to go into the details. And so just to think on, how am I wired? How do I normally move through the world apart from my culture? And so how do I now bring that awareness into meetings, whether it's culturally diverse or not? I'm probably still going to have other people in the meeting that are lantern carriers instead of flashlight folks. And so at least if I'm aware of these worldviews or these views, that awareness can help or should increase my communication once I recognize what's going on around me.
That's really nice. Thank you. You put that really well. Yeah, I think that's it. And I think in the English language speaking world, you're also rewarded for being a flashlight carrier because we like precision and clarity, and we believe those things are the things that deliver productivity and all the good stuff that we think we like.
Right.
So we reward that time again. So there's no incentive to become a lantern carriers are old fashioned. They're not very powerful. It's kind of how you grow up with, I think, if you are a flashlight carrier, that's the power to have. But really, growing up in Japan, I can tell you that it's really an upside down world in a way because people don't vie. When I say this to English language speakers, they say, what? But people don't vie to talk. So it's not, the responsibility of communication doesn't rest with the clear, eloquent speaker like it does in the West, as you say, or in the English language speaking community. It really rests with the people who understand and who can absorb the other person really well. So they are rewarded for carrying a lantern in a sense in Japan. So the whole incentive structure is also geared towards lanterns rather than flashlights. So sometimes when I'm talking about listening, I always feel like it's kind of a hard sell in this kind of speaker dominated English language speaking world, because in universities, I think I systematically gave 15% or something for class participation. It was the responsibility of the speaker to communicate their ideas across to the other person. And we think of great speakers and orators and really idealize speakers, not the people who don't say anything. Those are people maybe a bit shy or don't know things, or people, they might be asking questions to themselves, but they don't ask them out loud. I think that weighs in very heavily in trying to understand that kind of other world where people are going around with their lanterns. Yeah.
I think of the success of one of the TED Talks that's in the top 10 about the power of introverts. And as you're mentioning, in the Western world, we give all the kudos and all the rewards to the extroverts or those people that are out talking. But there's a whole group of people who are perfectly fine just doing their own thing and being the introvert. And there is a beauty and there is remarkable capability within those folks who are introverts. To your early point about fragility, I'm coming in with the perspective that says anti-fragility is the first and foremost the thing that I need to build towards, right? Which means, okay, I'm also going to bring my flashlight and I'm going to be an extrovert, right? So this means that I'm going to succeed when those are just built-in assumptions. And to look at the other side certainly can expand one's world.
Yeah, I think there are important assumptions to have in a particular world, but then when those other worlds meet, that's when you have the conflict. Yeah, so I think there are probably many different channels of listening and many different channels of questioning, and half the battle is to know which channel you're in. So I think of another one, and remember in the old radio days when we were in our cars and trying to find our stations.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to find one station but keep getting another one, then you probably will never get the music you're hoping for because it's not on that station. Just even knowing that there are different stations and they typically play these kinds of music is probably half the battle. Yeah.
Hmm. So it could be for folks listening, if you're going to meetings and there's an individual or leadership just never hears you, it may be that you're trying to listen to or trying to talk at the wrong station because maybe they're a lantern person.
I'm glad. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Hmm. They may be more of a lantern person that needs to be able to understand more of the context before they can get to the details. I know for me, I'm probably more of a lantern person than a flashlight person, I think, just because I generally think broader scopes and I just don't hold on to the details well in my brain. So by virtue of that, then I'll celebrate my strengths, if you will. Maybe a shout out to all the other lantern people that are out there.
I think we all have all of those channels available to us. I think that's one of the amazing things about listening is you can listen to classical music or you can listen to pop. It doesn't matter, but you have a preference and maybe a tendency over a lifetime of doing one thing. So you end up doing that it becomes almost automatic to you to do it. I was thinking the other day of how probably if he does listen to this, he'll kill me. But my partner was thinking with my daughter. She often comes and says something, and he's a big problem solver, so very detailed guy. So there goes the flashlight, and he says, "Oh, why don't you do?" I think when we were exploring questions, you were saying something about what are the questions that aren't really questions. So that's one of them. He says, well, why don't you do X, Y, Z? And that usually tends to really annoy her because that's not why she was spilling her guts out. And it always makes me laugh. He even knows about it himself. But it's a kind of tendency that we have that if you're been really schooled and trained in problem solving, then you're going to do that kind of automatically unless you kind of go, oh, okay, that's really not the kind of attending to she needs right now. Kind of take a step and then say, okay, actually, she just wants me to hear her out. So I don't need to do anything. I just need to be here and present with. I don't need to solve her problems. I think it's just kind of knowing that all the dials, are the full range is available to you, and just knowing when to tune into one channel over the other. Oftentimes these things happen at the end of the day when you're just coming back from work or something. So of course you're going to be in problem solving mode, and it's going to be a lot harder to switch between the stations. On all accounts, it's very understandable, but those little conflicts happen all the time. So it's interesting.
I think the awareness of it, and going through your book, I appreciated these different categories of listening. And to your point on kind of the levers and the dials that we can push and pull and twist, that says, okay, at least the awareness of them is that first step to me. Whether you camp out in one particular, that's your default, okay, so be it. But at least the awareness of it. Like we know that we have open-ended questions and closed-ended questions, and you use them at these different points. It's like, okay, in the world of listening, which if we're asking questions, then we should know that we're also going to get asked questions. And so this listening thing for the questioning community is a critical component of the world in which we're saying that we want to grow. And so I'm grateful for your work in that it's giving these additional awareness of these elements of listening. So, yeah.
I think so. I think everyone recognizes it's important, just like everyone recognizes asking the right questions or good questions is important. But we tend not to talk about it because we tend to talk about the flashlight. I think,
We do.
yeah, in a way, there's little vocabulary to talk about them, and all this is doing conversations with you is just kind of adding vocabulary or bringing out a way to talk about them so that everybody feels more comfortable talking about them, because we know how to talk about speaking, good speaking, and but we don't really know what listening or questioning is, and maybe because there are so many different ways and kinds of them, so labeling them this or that or the other I think is a good thing. And there are many more than the channels that I tune into regularly. I'm going to receive a big, like an encyclopedia of listening. And I think they say there are 177 ways to listen. There are many, many ways
Wow.
of listening. Some of them might be ones that I might not think of as listening or even questioning. If you say things to tell a child to go to the room, you're not listening, so you should just go to your room. I don't think that kind of listening is part of the spectrum that we're talking about in communication. But there are really all different kinds of listening.
Now, can you tell the story about your accident and some of that backstory? Because that really is kind of a crazy story that you went through.
Story. So I fell off a scooter, and I wish I could say it was the cool motorcycle kind of scooter, but it wasn't. It was a pedal scooter, and I fell poorly, and I fell on my jaw, and my jaw unbuckled, and the upper side of my jaw, the part that's close to your ear, came off and then pierced my eardrum and backed up into my brain. Bad situation. And so then I was admitted into an ICU in a London hospital. And in one of the intubations, which is a kind of hose that it allows you to breathe during surgery, that they typically put down either your mouth or your nose, pierced my lung. So then I had to be connected to, I had a tracheostomy, which is they put a hole in your throat so that you get a ventilator so that you can have assisted breathing. So by the time I came around after those two surgeries, I had something like 9 IVs, I think, 2 lung drains, and this tracheostomy. And thanks to the 9 IVs, one of the things that happens when you have all those drugs is that you feel okay. So I said, oh, well, you've sewn me up. I'm fine now. Can I please go home? And they said, no, you can't go home. And I said, why not? Because they said, we have to get better. And I said, what do I need to do to get better? And they said, well, you need to be able to breathe on your own. And at that point, I realized that I was attached to this kind of ventilator. I couldn't leave. I couldn't go home. And so it took me a whole month to be able to do that, because a hole in your lung, this is really exciting, but you just have to wait for it to kind of close up. It's like a sponge, and you just have to wait for it to close up for you to have a working lung. So I waited, and during that time, I had a lot of time to think. So I thought a lot about listening, and I was a sociolinguist. So I had already thought about language and the way language works within society and across cultures, but I never really thought about listening as a part of health. And so I started looking into that, and there are all kinds of studies that show that people who felt heard had a life expectancy that was better than people who hadn't felt heard. People who had chronic diseases and cardiovascular impairments were far better off when they felt that they had been listened to. That was when I discovered that listening isn't just sort of cognitive listening and understanding within social circles and across cultures, but that it is also deeply linked to mental health, of course, but also just health in general. That kind of brought me full circle around the whole idea that listening is important, just not for cognitive health, but relational health as well. And relational health is in turn important for physical health.
So first off, I'm glad you made it through.
Thank you.
For you and your family,
Yes.
and now people get to read the book, right? But it's like, glad you made it through. Glad you got the medical help you needed.
Yes.
The body healed,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and then so time frame wise, how long ago was that happened?
This is almost 20 years ago. Yeah.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I hate to hear those stories of folks that get further injured or problems in the hospital, right? It's like, it's dangerous enough outside, but then you go in and accidents happen, and those are just tragic. So that idea of listening, what have we learned about listening post-COVID, for good or bad?
I think having a digital interface is obviously a different kind of listening than being in person. One of the things I really noticed is that my daughter was working at home during that period. And so it was 100% remote, and she was working from.
Right.
And because she grew up in almost, that was the beginning of her career. I mean, it was the majority of her career up until then. She said strange things like, oh, it's so strange when you go and meet people in person, then you don't know what you look like to the other person. I was thinking, what is she talking about? But then I realized that if you grow up in that generation, you always have another lens that you are conscious of when you're talking remotely, like us right now. And so in a way, it's a whole nother level or a different kind of listening than we do in person when we don't have that. So I guess that's my way of saying that it's different and not necessarily all negative, but just different. We're entering a very different kind of listening phase. I think the other thing that online kind of interaction has brought about is that we are another two things, and they're very related, and I talk about it a little bit in the book, is that because you can do more you have more time available to you because you're not commuting anymore if you're remotely commuting into work. That has spawned counterintuitively perhaps more meetings and perhaps more unnecessary meetings, which has in turn has spawned a lot of more multitasking. So while you are online and in a meeting, you are not on screen doing something else. And again, this is not always bad, although initially there was a lot of sort of micromanaging that happened as a result of that, because obviously you were chatting with friends or doing your laundry or doing something, and rather than working was the thinking then. But I think, again, that kind of creates a new kind of way of interacting and working. I don't know. Are we always less efficient if we're doing that? There are earlier studies in person if multitasking is seen as usually as getting in the way of productivity. But I don't think we know fully how that affects our productivity and if it's all 100% bad. So I think we work in different ways. For sure, we work in different ways. I guess the only thing that I would add to that is that we are always multitasking. I think we like to think that we're doing things singularly, but we are always multitasking. So it is just another dimension of our multitasking. I mean, when we're talking, we're always kind of listening to ourselves as we talk. When we're listening to somebody else, they say this isn't good, but we are thinking about what we're going to say next sometimes. So we are kind of, you can't just deny that we're not doing these things. I think multitasking is something that we do, and it's not always bad that we do those things. But ideally, we can figure out a way that works for us, that is manageable for us, and also look after the people who are actually not working or whatever. But I'm not convinced that that's the majority of the workforce, that they're chatting with their friends. I think they do some of the time, but when we were in person, we did that too.
Yeah, I do wonder about that, like that in-person chatting, where for the last 8-9 months, I shifted from working at the office for the government to doing this full time. That means that there isn't a getting up and just bumping into anyone in the hall or going and sitting down, talking about the thing that we needed to talk about. But hey, also, whether it was the sports team or whatever. And I wonder about what the impact is of not having all those micro conversations, of just relational building, but just by being isolated. So on the listening front, I wonder how my listening has changed, assuming it's probably gotten worse because I have less practice on a daily basis, but that's an assumption that could certainly be challenged. I just wonder how that's changed things for me, whether it's this just for this season or longer term, if it's going to change other behavior.
I think the part of that sticks out to me is the serendipity part. So I think the kind of chit chat along the way, I don't know, I see younger generation doing that a lot, except it's texting and it's not just bumping into somebody. So they have that. And the advantage of texting, of course, is that, well, you don't have to bump into somebody and answer straight away. It's not like an impromptu thing that you have to respond straight. You can just kind of leave it. And so I think the change that has happened is that it's become more, this is like your podcast, but they're more curated. So you have curated interactions. Thinking about dating today seems to me, as a complete outsider, very curated. They seem to go into dating knowing much more. Than my time, we knew nothing. And so this kind of impromptu, serendipitous kind of interaction is missing. And if you had that before and you don't have it, I would imagine we would miss it, right? But I don't know if you haven't had that and your operating norm is without that and more sort of texting, and that's the normative behavior, then you wouldn't miss that. So I'm not sure what that means for a generation that had the full-blown version of living in a world without all this kind of curated online time, and which has become big enough that it's detracted from the in-person engagement and the kind of, how are you doing kind of thing that I'm very much a part of that world. So I would say I miss that too. I'm not really sure that research-wise we have the longevity enough to know the effects of that, but that's something that we can hunt around for more and see. Yeah.
Not too long ago, I saw where some creators were talking about in the world of media, and they're like writing for TV shows, that they are now dumbing down the plot lines a bit because they are assuming that most of their television show watchers are also scrolling on their phone. And so therefore, they're not fully listening to the programs. The programs are becoming less nuanced. And now the characters on the screen will now more often say outright what's happening or recount what happened previously 10 minutes ago, such that it's now delivered up that the people who are scrolling, they can get caught back up quickly if they've lost the last 5 minutes or something like that. And I was like, wow. So the TV folks are figuring out what kind of listening their audience is actually doing. And now they're building my terminology, dumbed down stories, because people just aren't listening the same. They're not paying attention.
I do know that people scroll a lot and also don't auditorily listen. That my definition of listening is broad, so it includes more than auditory listening. So there's much more subtitling today, and I'm probably guilty of that too. But so that not just in foreign languages, but the languages we don't know, but also in our own, there's subtitling. And so people are reading the subtitles more than they are actually listening to films or clips, or maybe in part because they're trying to be thoughtful to their neighbors and they don't want to play it out loud. In Japan, you're not even allowed. If they're not wearing headphones or earphones, they might be doing that out of thoughtfulness to the other people. But there are studies that say that people are becoming much more visual. So our cultures are more visual today than they've been before. I think that movement is there in place. So auditory listening is still going to have to put up a big fight again. But it's funny. So talking about the difference between visual and auditory listening, I wear contact lenses. And I remember that my mother took me to go get my eyes checked even before I had vision problems. But with hearing, I only went when I had this accident, and the audiologist then said, "Oh, you're just a statistic. You're not surprising at all that I'm the first audiologist you've ever seen." She says, "I don't know why, but people don't come until they have hearing loss." I think everywhere, visual things are always considered more important than auditory function, even though our hearing came in before vision, and goes out after, I think. So it is important because it's just in brute survival terms, it's important to be able to hear what we can't see to keep us out of danger. But we as a civilization tend to prioritize visual things more than auditory things.
I have tinnitus or tinnitus, however one wants to pronounce it. And I've been going through trying to get my Veterans Affairs kind of rating. And I know that I need hearing aids, and been waiting to see how this other thing goes to see if they're going to pay all those details. But I just know that I miss so much, whether it's the music that I'm trying to listen to, or the TV or movies, or my wife. I'm just not hearing. And I know that I'm missing out on much of what's going on around me. At this point, I literally don't watch TV and movies. Well, most of the TV I just don't really want to watch anyway. But for movies, I just really don't enjoy them because I can't hear them. Yeah, I can't hear the nuances in the language. And so now I'm missing out on a bunch of things. If I'm going to go, I need to go to the big movie theaters where it's cranked way up and it doesn't need to chase my wife out of the room to turn it up. I've shifted to, if I'm going to watch something, I'll watch it with subtitles. I just know. And it also scares me from a dementia and Alzheimer's perspective, as far as the brain, and knowing that oftentimes it's seen as a contributor. I would say within the next few months, I'll probably be wearing them.
Oh, well,
just to get just to be able to get that back.
I have one in the bad ear where I had the accident. And I didn't wear them straight away, actually. I only have had this for about 5 years, but it obviously contributed to it. But she was saying that by the time people come to see her, they have not been hearing for quite some time, is usually the reality today. But the hearing aids, they are expensive. But one of the amazing developments is that they have become much better, I think. I don't know. I'm not a person who was privy to the older version, but I remember my father-in-law just didn't want to have them. He said, "I hear everything." And I think they just had volume, so everything was louder. But today, that's almost feels like that's a superpower because you can turn down the ambient noise and turn up conversation with the person in front of you. So, you can quieten the surroundings and listen to the stuff you want to hear. And you can do that because mine has 2 chips in it. It's not just volume, it does pitch too. So my hearing loss is not being able to hear certain sounds. So yeah, I wouldn't be able to distinguish between an S ending, which would be present tense, and again, I think of one, and a D ending. So then logistically, that would probably confuse me. So I definitely needed the hearing aid, but so I would definitely recommend it.
It's one of those things that once I get it, I will go, why didn't I do this before? I am confident that will be the case. And my wife will probably also say, why didn't you do this before? Right?
Well, but it's a funny thing. We get glasses, but not a hearing aid. So, it's
Yeah, and I will absolutely say that there's a bit of vanity involved because of just the optics. I'm like, well, that means that I'm quote, getting older, which isn't necessarily the case because there's plenty of folks that are younger who've had
Yeah, no,
hearing
it's
loss or whatever.
recreational hearing loss is is a thing. So yeah.
Yeah. But that's a truth, and just being all the way up front. Yes, vanity is a factor. So just,
I think the new ones you can't
yeah.
even see them. So if you, so
Yeah, they continue. The technology continues to get
Yeah.
better and better on all fronts.
So-
Yeah.
Hmm.
As you were going through working on your book, what was something that surprised you in your research as you came across it regarding listening?
I think if you're circling back to the beginning now, that ambiguous questions or questions that at least like if I'm in my English language speaking mode, I mean, questions that I always thought were unclear questions, that they can sometimes be really good questions, that they could lead to maybe it wasn't the question that you intended to ask, but that can lead to some other kind of discovery. So that idea that ask the clear question and flashlight it is not always the best kind of question to ask. Sometimes a really, I guess what you would call an open-ended question, but even if it's a little bit too open-ended and ambiguous, could end up being a really good question. A question thing that I would have discovered along the way. So it has to do with kind of this coping with ambiguity in listening. I think it's the question that I answer, like, why don't people listen? And I think people don't listen because they're afraid of that uncertainty. I think a lot of the times people don't listen because they're afraid to they might find out something they don't want to, or because in listening, if you really invest yourself in it, it ultimately results in some kind of change. And that is something that becomes difficult once you achieve a certain kind of certainty in your life that this is what reality looks like. But if you're finding out, not really actually, then that's quite disturbing. So I think that's one of the reasons why people decide not to listen, because we were talking about hearing, is listening is different from hearing in the sense that all this amazing stuff goes on in your acoustic ear and then into your brain. But then once that lodges in, ultimately you have to decide to listen or not to listen, or to space out and go somewhere else in your head. So you have to decide, listen, and that's the point where somebody can recognize that you're not listening and say, hello, you're not listening, kind of thing. And why do you do that? A lot of times I think it is because or those are also the people kind of keep talking about what they know. So again, sort of reinstating their reality and then not listening to the other person. So I think potentially the other person could be saying something that disrupts your reality. And so that it could be a reason why you don't listen or you decide not to listen.
Yeah, that shake up for change, or that can certainly be scary.
Yeah. Because you make an investment when you listen to somebody, because it's an effort, and then both of you find out something in that. The speaker hears an echo off their sounding board, but you also find out something about them, but also probably yourself. And that could be an interesting process, but also could be a kind of painful process as well, because that's what growth is about. So
yeah, growth, it's a good and scary thing.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's a challenge at the same time. Yeah.
Do you have any questions that you've used throughout your life, or been any kind of a companion for you as you've literally trekked all over the world through the different places that you've lived? Have there been any questions that have helped you throughout your life? Anything come to mind?
I think the question that acquired sort of later in my teaching, maybe in the last 10 years, is what is it that I need to know so that I can help you? I was in a writing fellow group once, and I was helping students write papers. And I had a student with a learning difference, and they were so good that in telling me what they needed to know so that I could help them. Because in the beginning, I truly felt I'm not
Wow.
trained to do this. I don't know how to help this person. I could just tell you what a good paper should look like. And this is not a paragraph that belongs here. But I really didn't think I could help this person. But this person helped me, had the language to help me help them. So it was very easy in the end because I knew so well what the kind of help they needed. And obviously they had been through the system that taught them this, but they were able to say that. So my question to students going forward from them is exactly what is it that you want me to help you with here? Because every person comes with a different set of needs and desires about what they wanted their ideal paper to turn out like. I kind of kept that in the back of them. It was a really teaching moment for me, but that's what that student taught me. I really enjoy learning from young people because they have so many ideas that sometimes weren't really available in our time growing up, but also because they're at the kind of beginning of their learning trajectory, they ask a lot of questions that haven't been manicured in any way. So sometimes those questions are really like, okay. And then when you think about it, as that, the Japanese koan, the Zen koan effect, a strange question
right.
kind of jars you into thinking, okay, that was a bit, ooh, and then makes you think of something you wouldn't have otherwise have thought of. I guess those are the questions I think of.
I am excited for that student that knew how to communicate well to you.
Isn't it amazing?
What his needs are. That truly is remarkable.
Yes.
It'd be lovely if everyone was like that, right? And if we had all gone through, because now they understood who they were.
Yes.
They understood how their world worked and what worked best for them.
Yeah.
And now this is how I need you to teach me, or this is what this insight needs to look like. Please help me. That I had gone to a graduation for our neighbor. He was graduating from Cornell, and this was on graduation day. And we were getting a whole group of people from parking over to the stadium. And I said, hey, this is what we're going to do. And we'll get everybody. And just very clearly, he said, I do not understand what you're saying. Can you please state it again? I was like, that was like 10 years ago, right? Just in a passing conversation, but the clarity and the humility in saying, I don't understand.
Yes.
I continue to carry that with me and hopefully been using it more and more to articulate that. But I'm excited for that individual.
Yeah.
Life will be far better by having the teaching that they've encountered and then the humility to say what they need.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, the questions that the students are asking today, any insight into why they're asking these kinds of questions, or it's this kind of rough clarity, like you said, the koan kind of idea? Any idea why that's the case?
So to back up a little bit, I think most students are not like this student. And I think many of them really just want a nice letter on their essays. Not all of them are as enlightened as the student was. But I think the educational system has become more curated and likes a formula. It's that's a whole nother conversation. But I mean, it has to do with, it makes the life of everyone easier. Here's the thing you need to know, write like this, and you'll be okay later on, kind of thing. So it is very formulaic, more so, I feel, than, I don't have enough data points, and this is completely personal to say this, but then I feel like I experienced. I feel like our time was much messier and professors had the bandwidth and also, I don't know, much more time, and things weren't so tight, so they could spend more time with students than they can today. So
Gotcha.
in a way, that's really not answering your question. But
I would say it's a symptom, right? If this is what you're witnessing now, and you're, you know, you're living it, right? So this is what you're experiencing, what you're seeing, and the engagement with the students, your understanding of how it works faculty wise, and the pressures and the rest. Okay, that is reality.
So I think that the going back to that student, what made this particular student so remarkable was that all the other students could just go about their day, do this thing. I would do my thing, and that was that. It was like that was the package. Whereas this particular student had to figure out a separate way of doing it so that would work for them, and that was what made it so special. And that was what gave me kind of the teaching moment rather than the rigmarole stuff I was normally doing. So, yeah, truly amazing.
What about the kind of the general population of students? How have you seen their questions change or remain the same since you have been teaching over the years?
Well, I'm no longer teaching now, so I can't say for very recently. I think that questioning is right in there with listening, in that it is still not the mainstay of the academic classroom. I think the ideas come with something that they can deliver, that is something that involves a presentation or something that has been packaged into something that is presented and curated and presented, more than kind of individual research. This is what I'm really excited about, this crazy thing. This is what I want to write my research paper about. I think there is less room for that. And that is, again, not so much the fault of the student, but kind of an institutional leaning, I think. Yeah.
Let's pivot back to specifically on the listening and the different kinds of listening. Is there maybe one or two kind of forms that you think are maybe underappreciated, or how you've categorized some of the listening styles, or how we listen?
The two main ones are that sort of content listening, informational. We listen for information, and we listen for the person, the tone of voice, the things that aren't said, everything that's vocal but nonverbal, and not just body language, but also things like pacing in conversation. Those all send signals to us that if we are a first language speaker, or what we used to call native language speaker of a language, we just take for granted. We hear those things. We hear a lot of hesitation or somebody speaking quickly. We evaluate those things along with the words, and that's part of the language, part of our fluency when we speak it, and part of our interpretation, the way we understand language. So I think that part is always undervalued, I think, in a way, and people sometimes even get really uncomfortable with talking about those kinds of things because I think almost every business school has an interpersonal relations class, and despite the fact that everybody gets really uncomfortable about it and thinks of it as a soft thing that's not really business, they remain one of the more popular classes. And the one at Stanford has been nicknamed since I think the 70s, the touchy-feely class, and which I think is really indicative of the way people feel about that kind of language. Oh, okay, it's the stuff that we have to talk about it, but it remains really popular. And I guess because it's in the MBA programs, they are thought to be important as well. So I think those are the ones that I will probably keep pressing on about. That language is, of course, important. And sometimes it's more important than people say. Like I hear in the popular presses sometimes that body language is more important than language. It carries more important than language. And you're saying, no, it isn't. Words are important too, but other parts of language are also important. And that is also systemic in the sense that linguistics has always looked at theory and language in isolation from all those other things which weren't really considered important in communication. But we have known for some time that really are. And it's a part of our language that we use rising tone, intonation to ask questions and then invert them, to play with language, to display sarcasm, and all those kinds of things that help us understand what somebody is saying, whether they're being serious or they're joking about. So I think that part of language is really important. And the way we learn it in our infancy and as children. And that's why children learn languages so much better than adults, especially second languages. But if we keep looking for that, I think we can learn second languages more easily and also keep learning more about our first languages better too, and what other people are trying to say better as well, because we get all touchy-feely about that later in life, and whereas as children they're allowed to learn everything. And that's the part that I talk about in soft listening. We tend to put all our energy in that kind of critical listening, the credibility listening, and our soft listening skills are viewed as less important over time, but they're really important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, if we go back to the lantern versus the flashlight, I'm completely making a leap here, is the quote touchy-feely, is that more a lantern-esque kind of view?
Yeah, I think so, because you're worried about the context. So, everything that happens in the situation and the people. So it's not only, I know that emotional intelligence has been coming up, but it's not just emotions. It has to do with, every time you say something, you say the words, but you're also saying something about the relationship you have with the person you're talking to. Even if you don't mean to, I think you're saying something, communicating something about the relationship you're hoping to have or trying to project. And so you need you need a big light for that in that space to be able to see what will come up as opposed to whatever it is that you're looking for. The listening for information is really how computers listen, in the sense that they tag words. You track language. As adults, we track a lot of our language. So it's not like we're hearing words for the first time. We have an idea about what we're going to listen to based on our past learning, and we listen for it. I talk about this in the book, but listen in Old Saxon, the ancestor of English, listening, it means listen for. So we actually listen for the stuff we're hoping to hear, and we listen to it and you say, aha, it's track number 7 kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the other stuff that we're learning about a new situation, because every situation is new, even though we know the people, is new. So that stuff is a lot more difficult in a sense, because we don't have that knowledge, as much of that knowledge as the language, which is more codified, also requires more energy. So we need more light, broad light for that, I think. Yeah.
It's an interesting point that you mentioned there regarding the energy. And if I think on when I probably listen better versus not as well, energy is probably one of the things that a major factor that comes in, right? We talked earlier about end of the day, you just walk in the house or something like that after a full day, energy's down, my ability to listen well is probably decreased at that point. And so if I'm going to be listening, I just need to also be aware of energy and how that's playing a role. If you were to teach these concepts back to the Japanese, I would guess that the Japanese, because of the prevalence of English in the business world, that it would be less new learning for someone that speaks Japanese than Westerners. Is that fair?
I think it's just
think?
as hard for Japanese to learn the other way around. And
Hmm.
that we have some figures to show that. I mean, not only is it just the English language is really hard to learn, but I think the English language is hard to learn for the Japanese. And this has flummoxed English language teachers in Japan for a really long time. You know, they have the funding, they have everything they can to promote good standards of English learning, and yet they still come out not very high on the rankings list.
Really?
Yeah. And
Huh.
I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the cultures are really different. And so learning a language isn't just about learning the words and the grammar and the syntax. It has to come with the whole package. And the whole package is really hard. You know, culture is really hard to learn. And especially if it competes in some way with your own. If you feel that learning one, it makes a deficit on your own, even if that's just a perception. And that is a big thing, I think, for many Japanese, that they feel like in learning English, they would have to give up something from their own culture. So that's probably a way out there kind of remark that I've just made. But I think that accounts for one of the reasons that they come out poorly in the results in the language learning rankings.
So as a result of your experience having to be more nimble, let's say, between cultures, it maybe, is that something that because of your experience you've had to forego, or you've chosen to forego, realizing that you don't need to give up
It
a
is
portion of
still
yourself?
really hard. And it's hard to explain as well. It isn't easy being bilingual because it's not like you can kind of turn on one switch and turn off the other one. I always say that in a way, all your switches are always on, and you just have to kind of a little bit like, did I hear you say you have tinnitus? I have tinnitus too, but
Yeah.
it's a bit like tinnitus.
Yes.
So you just have to kind of, it's there and you just have to not pay attention to it too much. So that's what being bilingual is like. It's there in the background, but you just, you know, I'm speaking English now, so just speak English. But it does compete in a way in your mind. So that is not always easy. So I do have a great deal of sympathy for second language learners of any language. But as I always tell my children, you're just lucky to learn it as a child because you didn't have to have all those social, not impediments, but that's barriers to learning. So I don't think it is a linguistic inability. I think it is a sociocultural one. So if I were to go in with this listening book to Japan, I'd probably have to kind of reverse the lens and say, here's the informational listening side that, you know, that we want to pay attention to. That part of it, the Japanese have been interested in English language speaking countries in the West in general. Since the end of World War II, they have been focused and they translate everything into Japanese. So they are aware that they have to shake hands and they have to try to sort things out in the meetings and that there is an agenda. And they are generally aware of the behavioral norms of English language speaking countries. So they have been practicing that. But still, it doesn't come naturally. There's that famous handshake of a former Prime Minister Abe and President Trump in his former term when they were shaking hands. And the shaking hands, I think it's still there on YouTube somewhere, but it goes on for from on this side, an eternity, you know. You can just see him trying to retract his hand, but it's not being released, and he starts to get this nervous laugh, in fact. And if you're watching it, it makes you kind of feel uncomfortable. So yeah, I think cross-cultural gestures and all the other parts that go along with language are very difficult to learn, and you can get near, but sometimes
Not going to get it all the way
yeah.
there. As I've done my own learning on some various culture things, although I've gotten many wrong, I will just embrace. I'm like, the intention is not to get them wrong. And I know I'm going to stumble. I'm not going to get it all right. And so I'll still lean in and then just laugh because I know I'm going to get some of them wrong. So need to move towards wrapping up. In order to come to the present, I'd like to ask folks what their right now question is. So this is something beyond what's for dinner and who am I going to get married to if I'm going to get married? And it's more about what are the questions that you're working with right now? What are your right now questions or question?
I think my right now question is related to that question that was inspired by that student. What can I do to help the current situation? So when something goes awry in a conversation, so if we go back to that interaction between my partner and my daughter, what question could I ask that would help him understand what my daughter needs in that moment? And because people ask me all the time, what can I do to become a better listener? What can I say? And it's very difficult to give one answer to that question. But I think if I can think about what is it that I could do right now that would help, then a question, then the resolution would be that my partner wouldn't feel defensive about my saying, oh, that's not what you wanted, or it wouldn't be a kind of an instruction or anything. It would be much more of a kind of a suggestion, because I think that's what kind of questions are really about. You want to have it become your own in a way, so that you yourself can figure out where you want to go in with your lantern in that path. So it's about maybe coming to the idea that every person is able to come up with the questions that will lead to the answers that will lead them down the path. And maybe they might not know exactly what they're looking for, but will lead them to some kind of new learning that will push them in the right direction. So it's a navigational compass of sorts.
Lovely. That'll work. That'll work. Well, thank you. Haru, thank you for the time. So, thank you for the work that you've done and helping us to remember that we need to be listening and just bringing it to the forefront, that it's something that we can be paying attention to. We can improve, but starting to give us a vocabulary for that. So thank you for that. And also love the discussion. I'm going to carry the lantern and the flashlight story with me.
Oh, good.
Definitely.
I'm glad you liked that one.
That's going to give
that
me
was a new one.
A lot to think on that. Yes. Yeah. So thank you for being a part of the Curated Questions community. And thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.